Okay, do we have an updated presentation? And is, just for the sake of people in our viewing audience, has the packet online been updated too?
Yes, the packet
Gosh, it
online
has.
is updated.
Wonderful.
The packet online was correct. It was,
Okay.
it was just the screen that we were showing. So the
Terrific.
materials you have is correct. The materials that the public were able to view are
We're
correct.
all on the same page.
Yes,
This slide
absolutely.
is much better than
thank you. There's a bit more detail.
It's
for
worth
what
the 5 minutes.
exactly
right?
we're asking you for. So once again, we're looking for your input and direction today. We're not looking for a decision. We're going to come back to you in March with a refined proposal based on the feedback we get today. The specific questions that we have for you include considering a recommendation to elevate resilience as a guiding theme in our ARPA framework refresh and continue to use the core values of equity, collaboration, and good governance that your board previously approved. We're also asking you to consider reallocation and directing staff to work with your steering committee to provide a recommendation for tranche 1 funds that have not yet been committed. And finally, we have a suite of allocation options we're presenting to you today. We want your guidance on those options so that we can come back with a more detailed proposal for next time. Now, a really brief reflection on the outcomes from the first half of funds. So throughout the pandemic, we've been really laser focused. ARPA investments have been essential in driving community-wide progress through response and recovery phases and now toward a resilience phase. Shown here is a small sample of achievements. A full review is available in your board packet for every one of your ARPA programs. Just some quick highlights. As a county, we've been competing above our weight class when it comes to our performance. A little too sticky there. We've gotten national level recognition in the form of awards and inclusion to invitation only best practice circles. And this has really affirmed the board's approach when it comes to your ARPA framework. This recognition means that we've been thoughtful in the pacing, design, tracking, and engagement across ARPA programs, especially in centering equity. Shown here and included in the packet in greater detail is the current snapshot of your tranche 1 spending. Regarding reallocation opportunities, staff and your ARPA board leads are working to bring forward a board-wide recommendation on reallocating your uncommitted funds. Altogether, we have the potential to consider $7 million or more in funds that are not currently tied to contracts. A common question that I get is, are we spending this money too fast? Are we spending this money too slow? Well, ultimately, the pace of spending is tied to board direction in terms of your investment strategy. We are benchmarking ourselves against other best practice jurisdictions nationally, and we find that we're in the middle of the pack when it comes to spend rate, and we are especially comparable to jurisdictions that have incorporated efforts in co-creation with community and projects design and implementation.
Can I ask a clarifying question on this model?
Absolutely.
Why is there a difference between unobligated remainder and uncommitted remainder?
That's an excellent question. So unobligated, we mean that in the formal Treasury definition of an obligation signed on the dotted line in a contract, versus uncommitted, things that are at various stages of RFP or contract negotiations, where that's already been committed to a project, but is not meeting the Treasury's definition of having already been obligated in the last quarter of contracts.
I'm with
That's
you.
dense.
I think that last.
Let's come back in March.
I think it's important that you manage to the Treasury, but for a layperson vocabulary, a non-US Treasury, unobligated means we, the Board of Commissioners, are not on the hook for continuing to use those funds under a model that may not work for us now in current time. So I don't know which of those columns to wrap my head around.
Sure. This is a much simpler way to visualize that information, really to answer the question of how much funding is the board really have to work with in terms of what's remaining from tranche 1 and that tranche 2 allocation. Your tranche 2 allocation, completely untouched, no board decisions yet, is at $58.4 million. And what I'm saying is there's approximately $7 million that isn't tied up at any stage of contracting that staff and your steering committee will review in detail and bring a proposal for reallocations next time that we meet. So really what to remember is you have $58.4 million to work with. We may be able to reallocate up to $7 million of that remainder from the first tranche of funding. It's a much simpler way than that previous slide of detail.
I have a quick question.
Well, and somebody's phones,
Oh. It's ringing.
So is that 7 million, in the previous slide, in the lower right-hand box?
Yes, that's
Okay.
okay.
So why isn't that 7 million
because they rounded up.
then?
Round it up and we're gonna take a look at how much is actually spent compared to what was contracted for, if there's a discrepancy.
I have a question, Dorian. You used the word reallocate. You're saying that in tranche 1, the 7 million was already allocated. It
Correct.
just didn't meet the treasury requirements. So they become unobligated now, or?
That is simply at this point in time, all of the different projects that your board has allocated funding toward, that is what hasn't yet been contracted or spent. Though you could choose as a board to leave those allocations in those projects if you want them to move forward. But you might determine that you have other priorities, that your priorities may be different than where you were as a board in 2021. And so what my team is going to do with Commissioners Harrington and Willie is bring a recommendation forward for these are the projects you might want to reconsider based on what priorities we hear from the board today.
Okay.
You could choose to leave them at their current allocations. That's an option.
Or increase them.
Yes, absolutely.
We just reserved the right to get smarter over the course of time.
Exactly. But that's a more detailed conversation for next time after we get a better sense of your priorities. In terms of thinking about ARPA phases where we've been, we have 2 different tranches of funding, but we're characterizing the journey that we've been on with ARPA into 3 different phases: response, recovery, and resilience. How we're recommending to characterize this in terms of refreshing the ARPA framework: response refers to all of the actions that we took directly targeting the COVID-19 emergency. Recovery being those holistic actions targeting the negative economic and health impacts of COVID-19, many of the projects that you approved for tranche 1. And where we're proposing that we go is this resilience category and really thinking about transformational actions targeting our whole system's ability to withstand future emergencies. And that's what we're recommending as a guiding theme for the entirety of tranche 2. I want to note that there's no distinct line in the sand between each of the phases here. When we were doing response work, we were also doing recovery work. And while we're doing recovery work, we're also advancing resilience. This is a broad continuum. And to illustrate this, I have put each of the different investment areas from your tranche 1 framework on this slide to show that we've been doing a little bit of each of these things, but we want to continue moving toward the right side of that continuum. This slide will be familiar in terms of ARPA timelines. This is a reminder that we have to fully obligate or contract all of our funding by the end of 2024, and we have until the end of 2026 to spend all of the funds.
Is that 24 fiscal or calendar?
Calendar,
We've got December 31st, 2024 to have everything obligated.
correct. Correct. And for both tranches, they're not treated differently.
I knew that, but I wanted you to enforce it.
Yes. So in terms of the proposed resilience theme, this also stems from community engagement efforts to date. At a summary level, community partners have expressed a strong desire to center social determinants of well-being, defined as this economic, social, and community factors that impact long-term quality of life outcomes. These are themes that emerged from a broad spectrum of factors. You'll see nonprofit community building, mental health access, small business support, and more. And now revisiting and refreshing the ARPA framework. So here are your previously adopted ARPA framework values. As stated, we recommend elevating that resilience value to be the entire guiding umbrella theme for work moving forward and to maintain equity, collaboration, and good governance as our ARPA values. In terms of implementing resilience as a guiding theme, how we would put this into action would be selecting transformational projects that use one-time funds to strengthen our ability to withstand future emergencies and focus on outcomes-based approaches grounded in social determinants of well-being for each of the projects. In terms of operationalizing equity, we're suggesting developing universal goals for outcomes while employing targeted strategies. This builds on the previous presentation that also mentioned targeted universalism. And you might recall this concept from previous engagement with John Powell, a national equity policy expert. For example, how would this look in action? If your board chose to invest, say, in small business resiliency for tranche 2, you might suggest that a goal is to ensure that all businesses in the county have access to training on how to implement a business plan. That's a universal goal because it applies to all businesses, but the best strategies to reach each business might differ across different types of groups. For example, Nina's taco truck might need a very different targeted strategy than Mustafa's tax service company needs for each business to thrive. So what this means in practice is we're recommending goals that apply to everyone, but we're not recommending one size fits all strategies to achieve equitable outcomes. I'm going to go ahead and skip this video for today, but I'll be sure that you have access to the link in the packet. In terms of collaboration, here is a quick review of the structures and the strategies that we've used for development of the ARPA framework to begin with. We recommend continuing to use these structures moving forward. In terms of implementing the good governance value, really here, we're leaning into transparency and connecting dollars to impact. We've heard board feedback and we have invested in glossy annual reports, quarterly reports, improved social media, and we're working on a public data dashboard as well for transparency. So now to the investment options. Again, we're not looking for a decision today, but we're looking to really gather your priorities in each of these areas. So for the tranche 1 reallocation approach, first we recommend reviewing programs with uncommitted funds and bringing a recommendation back to your board in March. In March, we anticipate having those reallocation recommendations and really bringing the feedback that you provide us today into a revised framework. We would anticipate board taking action in adopting the framework and investment area allocations in April. And finally, understanding that we need to obligate by New Year's Eve 2024, we recommend revisiting allocations every 6 months to make sure that we're spending on time and that we leave no dollars on the table.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
Because you used 2 different D words on that slide.
Oh.
It says April board-wide decision, yet in the paragraph below, it says board direction April. And I'm just wondering, I
Let me-
just want to make sure I know which it is, sorry.
Yes, I would. So we would like to get board direction in April, but we would anticipate any reallocations and the 6-month rotation of revisiting to start on July 1. But we would recommend taking board action in a meeting to adopt the framework and your allocation categories in April.
So I think
Is
that
it-
light blue
would it-
should be direction, not decision.
So there would,
Okay.
I'm wondering though, if I hear 2 steps in April.
I think
That,
you,
yeah,
I heard that.
direction and
And then
then
decision.
subsequent action. Okay.
Great.
Direction and
I'll
action.
make sure that's revised.
Direction and decision. I get that.
Okay.
I'm caught up. Thanks.
This slide is really the main course of our discussion here. We have a series of must-have investments and we have a series of options for your board to consider. In terms of the must-haves, we have COVID-19 public health mandate compliance. That $6 million is at the minimum level. This would be a reduced service level, reduced CBO involvement compared to our previous activities. The board has the option to allocate the 6 million or more to public health if desired. Conversely, it is completely possible that the amount needed for minimum compliance might shift. It may reduce over time, creating additional opportunity for a potential reallocation of funding. In terms of effective ARPA management, this includes meeting our requirements, continuing to have public transparency in what we're doing with our funding. After the must-haves, your board has about $47 million of tranche 2 for the options on this chart, in addition to a forthcoming recommendation on reallocation that could be up to $7 million.
Could I stop you and just ask a question
Yes.
here? So the total amount of money that we're talking about here is the 58 plus the 7.
Correct.
Okay, so I was confused there. For a moment.
That's correct. Haven't touched any of that 58.4 of tranche 2,
Right,
and we'll come back to you.
but you're combining the reallocated 7 million.
Correct.
And after you're done presenting this slide, before you move to the next one, I need to ask my board colleagues for a little help, but I'm interested in hearing any questions. Was there anything more you wanted to say on this slide?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Keep going.
At least for the options. You
Yeah.
know, those are the must-haves, right? But in terms of that, after the must-haves, you have about $47 million to play with. One option is community grounded projects that would include a suite of what community has prioritized as their resilience themes for the board to consider for one-time grant funding. For proposal review, you might consider prioritizing collaboration among large and small organizations and underscoring that resilience theme, selecting projects that are best able to leverage funding for other non-county funding sources in the future. While organizations might collaborate with county departments for proposals, I want to underscore that this proposed category wouldn't supplant county operations as a result of anticipated budget cuts. That $1 million there is really a placeholder. Your board could consider any amount. As for facilities projects, referring to the critical needs that you've reviewed in work session previously, those 24/7, 365 county facilities, we took a look, our county council took a look and specifically looked at those facilities projects that have air quality improvements. This would be to deliver core county services related to public safety and justice. County council's review of the Treasury guidance, which requires that all ARPA projects be reasonable and proportional directly to a pandemic caused impact. They've interpreted about $34 million of HVAC could meet that definition. And then finally,
So these are what this bottom row of numbers are guideline. They started as guidelines, and then internally we've said this is what we think is tolerable in these different.
correct. So you have about $48 million of critical facilities needs.
Right.
However, county council's review, what is reasonable and proportional to the pandemic, we're suggesting at maximum $34 million for those HVAC projects.
As enumerated on page 2 of the memo.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
call it that.
Yeah.
Right. And then the general government option would include an investment in the county's core service delivery. This would offer us flexibility as a tool to stabilize our operations through the current financial condition. Local governments have been subject to similar pressures as our community has been, higher interest rates, inflation, et cetera. And ARPA recipients have the option to pursue revenue replacement as a business strategy as we're impacted by the same challenges of community.
Excuse me.
These are flexible dollars that would be general funding equal to the amount of revenue that we lost during the pandemic. So we followed the Treasury calculation to look at how much revenue that we lost. That's $11.7 million. You could allocate that to a range of county services. You could allocate that to facilities needs, for example. And then finally, strategic planning, again, building organizational resilience and our ability to withstand future emergencies. Another option is to fund the consultant team for strategic planning with ARPA funds. And I'll pause there before moving on because Chair, I think you had a couple of questions.
Yep. Hopefully the easy one first. Could you remind me again, even though you probably just said it, I was distracted by math. Could you remind me again what the strategic planning is about?
Yes, so this would be directly in line with guidance that your board has previously provided in selecting a consultant to design the strategic planning process.
Oh,
And I would
This
also
would
be
be for the
happy.
countywide strategic
Yeah.
planning
Yes,
process.
Thank you.
yes.
So
Wasn't
using
confused.
ARPA as the funding source.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Okay, board, I need help. I don't have enough distance between me and the COVID years. So I'm a little concerned about Oregon trauma again. We have heard that the president is ending the health emergency in the United States in May. But I think our public health team is still on the hook for meeting Oregon public health standards, but I'm not hearing from the state for counties what that requires. And I'm not hearing our fellow counties who've received ARPA direct disbursements allocating anything towards mandated public health. And worse, here's the worst part. There were multiple times during 21 and 22 that were ARPA years where our county peers in other counties expected us to be more successful than even we were biting off as goals to make up for the lack of progress in their counties. And so when I look at this must-haves, I am not in any way resistant of our staff's efforts. Okay, and they're best estimating. What I'm concerned about is my lack of understanding of how the state is going to hold us accountable. I think I'm still a little fatigued by that. Do you know something, or is there something for me to understand that this thick head is not getting yet?
Can I ask a question first? So are you concerned that we are not allocating enough in the must-haves?
I'm not even that far along because I just don't know what the state is expecting us to do. And I've developed a negative attitude about unfunded mandates.
So I think you're
That maybe OHA is going to decide in 8 months it wants us to do X, Y, Z, which
And in shorthand, I think what I'm hearing you say is, number one, we know we're not going to be getting any more federal funds as of May, but we don't know what the expectations are going to be on ourselves set by the state. So without.
but all of our peers in Oregon, as far as I know, we're the only ones still doing work to program Tranche 2. It's been
already-
obligated or allocated by all of our peers. And I'm wondering, how come I'm not taking those La Ti Da happy pills?
They're not available.
I'm not. I don't usually, I'm not one to operate out of fear.
I think this is operating with caution that we've experienced because of what we've experienced. So I don't think it's fear. I think it's being prudent.
Darn.
Sorry.
So
Or-
if it's helpful,
Yeah,
if it's helpful, the team has done significant work in understanding what are our mandated requirements today.
oh,
And that is what's been used to inform this framework. That has taken significant time to really understand what are we mandated to do. I want to commend our public health team for thoughtfully moving us from high pandemic in partnership with our community partners to what you see on your screen. That would not have happened without the leadership and partnership of our public health team. We feel confident in this number that's presented to you today, and we know that things still may continue to change. So that 6-month look could be an opportunity for us to say, whoa, the mandates have completely changed. And there may be an opportunity to reallocate even what you see in the 6 million to something else. There could be. Do
so
we always play a risk? I'll just say with public health in general,
no
there-
more than
there-
anybody
right.
else.
So I don't want to say that we have a crystal ball. This is the best professional judgment based on the team, and they put a lot of work into getting to this point.
So hearing the discussion, I'm reminded that Dorian has reminded me it's things like that outbreak and other outreach for managing that. But I think what I'm really coming to is have you, public health experts, had meetings with a OHA so that they are reflecting back that your good planning work sounds reasonable? And I'm sort of wondering if Washington County needs to write them a letter saying, hey, this is what we're planning for, but if you want to hit us with a different kitchen sink, we'll probably need to regroup. We've had to turn on a dime too many times. What do you think?
Dr. Bowman Davis.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Marie Bowman Davis. I'm the Public Health Division Manager and the appointed local public health administrator. I would like to say that as local public health administrator, I'm supporting your board and the county as the local public health authority with their statutory responsibilities under Oregon Administrative Rule, which does include case investigation and outbreak and epidemic responses.
Yeah.
The guidance from the state comes from CDC because COVID-19 is a reportable disease. When the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention decides that COVID-19 is no longer a reportable disease, at least at the level it is now for the general population, then the state can change their requirements and the investigative guidelines that we follow and how we respond to case investigation and outbreak investigation and response.
So ending a health emergency is different than changing whether or not something's a reportable disease.
That's correct.
Yep. And we're doing what all county public health.
Yeah, I think it would be beneficial, I think, to the members of the public. Just as a reminder, Washington County is the second largest county in the state of Oregon and the most diverse. The Portland metro area, the Tri-County area, has over half of the state population and more than 2/3 of the BIPOC community. And therefore, we have experienced more disparities than other areas of the state.
So it's the CDC
Correct.
that determines our state of well-being, so to speak. But the federal government has stepped out ahead or in, you know, in a different realm and said, we're not going to be funding anymore. And actually, those two decisions are independent of one another. So that's, I think that's what makes your head spin a bit. Because you would think that they might be closer in alignment.
Yes, that is an accurate summary. And I think another example is, for example, tuberculosis. We have a significant amount of responsibilities regarding active and latent tuberculosis. We follow the guidelines of the CDC, the state, and our our investigative guidelines. And there is a lack of federal funding to support tuberculosis nationally.
So at least they're following a pattern. Silly us for not expecting this.
Thank you. It was a really helpful conversation for me. It really was, especially how some of the conversations have gone around our AOC tables over the last 2 months. And our entire public health burdens, and that includes behavioral health for Multnomah County and Washington County.
Yeah.
So keep up the good work.
Well, and thank you to
for
the board
your patience.
for your support.
Commissioner Rogers and then Commissioner Willie.
You made a comment that I want to maybe drill down a little bit on. Up front, I can tell you my prejudice on funds is to do capital improvement works for Washington County. 50 years from now, I think people will judge on whether we have facilities that are in good shape, not necessarily that we spend it on other things. And so I appreciate our public health response. I think it's been good. I understand it. I understand the dilemma you have between two states and federal, but you made a comment about 34 million, and I certainly encourage you. I don't know if you got a slide beyond this you can talk to, but the ones you sent us, that you need to do a little bit of work with consultants to make certain we could spend it all in that regard. You had them in various colored tiers. But you made a statement on 11 million. You said we had 11 million and we could spend that on capital improvement as well. Would that be in addition to the 34?
Yes, that would be in addition to the 34.
I mean, we've got a lot of needs, so we could spend 34 plus 11, 45 million.
Yes, that's
Right.
correct.
Thank you.
And then we would still have 3.77 million according to the memo to
Right.
find for the full 48.
Right.
So that, just to confirm, is that 11.7 because of what it would allow? Or is that the 11.35 million in the memo?
11.7 is the amount of eligible revenue replacement that you could put into general fund for government services.
They just both happen to be 11.
11 million, yeah.
Catherine.
Boy.
Thank
Your
you.
question.
Could I ask a question back on ARPA expenditures and obligations?
Sure.
So I just want to make sure I understand, and this goes back to your question about unobligated remainder and uncommitted remainder. The way I'm looking at that is the unobligated remainder is basically frozen.
Yes, until we get further board direction.
Right, okay, that's frozen. Then the liquid piece is the uncommitted remainder, which is what we've been talking about is the 7 million, correct?
We're not going to spend any of that until we get board direction.
Right, I
would also
understand that,
consider
but
to
when
you.
we're talking about this charge, the 7 million
Yes.
in this charge.
Yes,
Okay, so there is a potential for there to be more money out of the unobligated remainder as well.
that is correct.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
But I don't want to overpromise.
I understand. But I didn't, it's there. It's frozen now, but it'll thaw. And find its home.
You have something you want to say?
Well, no, did we ever get to your?
Sorry.
Nah, Pam jumps in front of me all the time, so it's okay. Um,
But she does it very
I know
quickly.
she's very, and has very good questions too. So going back again to this schedule. I really don't like the terms, as the chair pointed out, in those columns, because to me, unobligated remainder means it's not obligated and it's left over. And
You
then
have
we
to be a
move to an
card
uncommitted.
carrying US Treasury.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And You're talking to plebeians here, so, okay, we don't get this stuff. Okay, so anyway, just with that being said, in the unobligated remainder column, we've got $5.2 million plus $4.9 million, so roughly 10 million and change in those two columns under protecting public health. Okay,
Yes,
you want me to ask?
please
ask
ask the question.
Okay. The question is, we come back over to slide 22, where we talk about new options. And we were just having the conversation about must-haves. And what I was interpreting that conversation was, is that enough? Well, so wouldn't you take the 11 here and the 10 here and say, actually, we've got 21 million.
I'm gonna answer your question and clarify, this was provided in the board packet, but I should have made clearer in the slides here, is that $6 million assumes carry forward for the public health category.
I don't think.
And that's why there's the 7.
I'm just not.
Okay, let me think about that. I want you to say that again. That 6 million assumes the carryover. So basically.
For the
you're getting that
unobligated.
6 out of here.
So your question about what's in that uncontracted category, essentially,
The frozen one?
we would need to keep the allocation that you made in the tranche 1 framework to public health for this to be as low as $6 million.
And it's 12 is what you.
Oh, okay, okay. We have to have done all the work to have that, and if we don't, then that 6 million has to go up.
Right, if you looked at the,
Which is why she was just counting on that
Got it.
rightmost column.
and I see now
Close to
that's
7 million. Nope, I'm sticking
Oh,
to
I
the
think
7
I
million.
understand now. The 6 and the 5 is the 11 that comes off of the first schedule. And that's how you get to 7. You guys got monopoly money. out here.
No, no. This is what.
It's getting out of control.
11.7 is what Treasury would allow for general government use out of the 58 million.
It's not out of the 58, it's out of the 116,
Well,
but we only dealing
yes.
with 58.
Out of our ARPA distribution.
May I make a suggestion without offending you? Both Jerry and I sat the CPA exam many years ago, and one of the big things we did had to have very good techniques on how to show presentations of information. And I think it would be helpful if you could take what is there that you haven't spent, showing what the carryover is from tranche 1 to tranche 2, and then how you're allocated. The spreadsheet is really hard to follow, and I think that's why everybody's wants a question.
understood.
Respectfully, yeah.
No, that's great. I'll take a look at that.
I think you're doing a phenomenal job of trying to track the US Treasury vocabulary and my layperson needs.
My problem is my
commend
lack
you.
of knowledge. Thank you.
I also want to underscore that part of the reason why we're suggesting a clean break and refreshing the framework is that when your board made the decision to allocate funds, we didn't have final rule yet. We received several iterations of updated guidance after you adopted the framework. So that's some of the angst of the retrofitting that's happening here.
Well, and I continue to stand by all the great work that staff is doing with community partners. There isn't any money that is being wasted. It's all being put into really powerful action in the community. So
And speaking of that, like, how does that reflect on this slide?
In terms of community priorities. So in terms of community priorities, we've been gathering pandemic recovery and resilience thematic areas from community. And we would anticipate that if your board chooses to invest in the community grounded resilience projects category, that we would anchor that to the feedback that we've received from community as part of that review process.
but I don't know what that means in terms of a timeline, right? So, I've read the various quarterly reports and I've seen the emails about the different work group meetings. But if I think about the approach and the nice arch timeline, oh, okay, I'll go there.
In a summary version of the ARCH timeline that you're referring to, really today wanting to get a sense of what of those options are your priority areas so that we can bring back proportions within each of those. Also wanting to reaffirm, did we get resilience right? Do we still have the same values that we had the last time we made allocations? I'd propose another work session in a couple of weeks from now, in March, with a reallocation proposal and a revised overall framework. So how much do you want to put in approximately to facilities? How much do we want to put in approximately to community resilience projects, et cetera? What are the priority areas that you want to see as investment categories? You tell us the investment categories that you want to see. I can come back with a refined proposal rather than just a suite of options, so that in March you can work together to work toward a decision rather than just a suite of options.
So when I looked at the prior table, I assumed that all the items under blue and beige, with the exception of what's in gray or purplish over on the right, would add up within the 58, but I didn't do the math to confirm. And so I'm just hoping that we can take the 7 million and increase the community grounded economic resilience programs and get more out in the community for a stronger community, knowing that I don't have to make that decision today, but that's what I like about the overall framework that you have here, knowing that you're going to be coming back to us in March, giving us more of that community feedback, since you had that schedule of January, February, maybe March meeting with community.
Right.
Can you define for me, when you said the meeting with community, what does that mean?
Those crew meetings,
It's crew, and will it also be acre? Is that, or no? It's just crew,
no,
isn't it?
crew is focused
Only on ARPA. I
Yeah.
understand.
What's crew again?
CREW is the COVID-19 Racial Equity Work Group. It was originally developed during the CARES Act period to help us design and implement equitable pandemic health strategies. It's a relatively informal group. It's not application based, so very different than ACRE. It's really a work group where about 100 community-based organizations from across the entire county provide input. They're not a decision-making body, but we gather information on lived experiences throughout the community so that we can bring you information to make an informed choice on how you want to spend the funding.
So really a lot of ground level work about how putting those dollars into action has been working, clarifying what's it been like. And I just say this off of what I'm hearing.
You're
not 'cause
correct.
I've read anything or not, it's not because of any kind of presentations.
So part of the reason I asked the question before is it's slide 18, I believe. And it's the collaboration aligning values to actions.
Mhm.
And on that slide, you mentioned crew, acre, and small business network. That's why I was asking
Yes.
who you were going to be meeting with.
Yes, and we have presented ARPA information, including crew takeaways at ACRE, but that is a different body. The work group that I'm
This one.
referring to, oh shoot, did I?
May have trimmed it out.
Keep going. Keep going. One more.
There we go. Yeah, so in terms of structures, Yes, that code.
That's why I was asking the question about the communication piece. I just, when I saw it here.
We have interacted with Acre
Yeah, we were
as
there.
you know, but primarily in understanding community experiences. We've
Go
been
to
gathering information from crew. I would be happy to come back to Acre if you would like. But my understanding is that's a much more formal body than a different role and scope.
And I was just trying to align this piece with what I was hearing.
Yes. And for clarification, the Small Business Support Network is a brand new group. It is similar to CREW, but it is community organizations that explicitly focus on economic development for small businesses. Many crew members have joined the Small Business Support Network. It's just more focused in terms of discipline.
Really depends upon what kind of timeline we want to be making
Exactly.
decisions.
My comments would be, I think I'm hearing the chair, very similar comments to what I'd make. I would love to see the 34 million program to facilities. I'd love to see the 11 program to facilities. Because I think that this county can keep going on for another few centuries. And so I think we need to have good facilities. I would love to have you have and I'm not being critical, just maybe something that is more lay in terms of carryover funds from tranche 1, tranche 2, so we can kind of see how it flows. And you're doing a good work job. Beyond that, I think the rest is fine. But that's mine. But
I'd like to have information on what community grounded economic resilience projects look like.
Sure. So one option that we could consider in terms of how to implement that would be to have a public request for proposals, provide guidelines on how we want those. Actually, I think I have a slide on this. So in terms of community grounded resilience projects, we would anticipate having proposals include goals that are grounded in those social determinants, grounded in the feedback that we've received from crew, include an equity assessment, have a work plan, explain how an investment would produce a benefit beyond just the ARPA period. There's multiple ways that we could go about doing this in terms of if the feedback that I gleaned today is that you want to move forward and seeing what a process could look like for a community RFP, I'd be happy to bring more details and how we would evaluate that. Previous discussion in steering committee included a potential option to have a subcommittee of your board work with our community partners to score and determine a recommended package of projects for the full board to consider. But there's multiple different models that we could take on that front.
And that's different than what we did in tranche 1, focusing primarily on workforce development.
It is different, and it also would give more weight and power to the feedback that we've gleaned from community. So rather than when we were in that response mode with the county saying, here are the ways that we know we need to respond, we're going to design how to do it with community. This would be community saying, these are the things that would make us more resilient. It's more community defined than county defined in terms of delivery. We could, however, as an alternative option to having a community grounded approach, we could have departments define projects.
So all
Instead.
options are on the table. What I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable is that I know you're living and breathing this program 5 days a week, many weeks and months. So all this community feedback, grounded in community, I feel I'm afraid I'm detached from it. And so that's where we could be interested as a board in having some sort of community grounding grant program, but it's probably going to take a couple of touch points for us to understand what that feedback is.
Yes.
And then put together enough of a framework so that we're like, oh, okay, we've got appropriate goals and targets, and use the board and staff expertise to go put together that wonderful program in ways that I can hand wave describe here today, but I
Fabulous.
can't identify with.
Absolutely. I would be very happy to come back with a more detailed proposal. What would help me today would be to understand relative priority, relative scope.
Yeah.
You know, how big of a community grounded grant program are we talking about? You know, designing a $20 million program is different than designing a $1 million program. And I think to Commissioner Rogers' points earlier, in you know, his recommendation is spending the full 34 eligible plus the 11.7. Does that reflect the sentiment of the entire board? Is that a proportion of facilities investment that you're comfortable with?
So before you go any further, I'm comfortable with sorry, I'm stepping in. I'm playing my commission member card. I'm comfortable with this up to 34 million because you've given us a whole memo about what's eligible. But on the general government, I'm not comfortable in saying that can only be used for facilities, right? I am comfortable in saying, Ms. Angie, we understand that we have $48 million of immediate building needs, and we understand that you have a minimum of a $25 million gap in constructing your proposed budget. So here's the 34 to count on for the facilities projects out of ARPA. Here's 11.7. You decide out of your problem solving which of those buckets you use with that 11.7. I mean, it's only 2 months, 3 months max away, right? Between now and the end of April. So
If I could jump in, Chair.
yes,
This-
please.
This was a very informative presentation, Dorian. Great job and your team. And also kudos to Courtney for finding a way to weave into the facilities into here and finding ways to make it eligible or ability to be to participate in this conversation. I would have preferred, honestly, and I don't know, I think I've made the assumptions reading into the materials that I was gonna somehow come out of it, some way of options. Like, I think hearing what Marie said and the chair, the trauma involved around COVID and you know, and everyone, not just the community, but everyone, the systems that deal with the people and the people itself. So I would have preferred options of these numbers to say option one, minimum, bare minimum, the facilities, how much is the smallest amount that we are comfortable or we're willing to live with, and then option two, option three. I would say 34 million seems way too high for my comfort level to support for facilities, but I need to do more deep of homework and have more conversations with you, obviously, it's just the reaction of the materials. But I do agree, we need to solve our facility problems. And I think that we need to use all the tools in our toolbox to solve that problem. But I'm not sure, you know, so that I don't know what the next steps, but I would have preferred options to say this, like, I think one of the calculations the chair made was, let's put that 11 million or to somewhere, you know, so I that kind of options to say, you know, how do we narrow down and how do we come to consensus on these, but, so I'm not lost, I would say.
Can I
So
just-
you won't get a
Let me
direction.
jump in there. I think some of that's already been done though, Nafisa, by Greg's schedule that he showed us a few weeks ago, where it said we can bond X, we can scrape money from here and scrape money from there, and whatever the case is. But the fact of the matter is, if you use 34 million, you're still 14 million short, and you got to find that someplace. So you're going to borrow that money, which puts the debt responsibility on next year and the next 10 years? Or are you going to, if you use less than 34 million, then you're going to borrow more money? I mean, it's just like your house mortgage, you can buy X, but so I think that information has been provided to you by Greg in that schedule, at least.
May I say something about the grade? I think Greg, the two options was to not bond or to take the full amount of ARPA or to take 24 million is how I understood. So
Well, at that point.
that
we
is
didn't know
more
we
than
couldn't
20,
actually take the
34.
full amount to do it unless we.
So that's how I was
Combine those two.
reconciling what Greg presented to this, that it seemed way higher than the two options that was honed in on that.
No. They worked detail and put it in the memo that's in our packet.
4 options, but I think in the presentation here at the work session, 2 options were honed in on. So I'm focused on like the 2 options that were honed in is my understanding, the subject matter experts' suggestions. So I get what you're saying, Commissioner Willie. But the 34, from my recollection, the 2 options that was presented seemed more than that. But I'm not saying facility needs to not be invested from ARPA.
Well, I guess what
just
I'm
think-
saying is, you're saying you wouldn't commit $34 million to the repairs, and I'm saying, then how much money do you want to borrow? And how much of that responsibility are you going to push into the next 10 years of general fund demand, which reduces the ability to fund departments? Okay, so all you're doing is taking a portion of this and pushing it out into the future versus.
For other difficult budget years.
Yeah, for other, which are going to be probably equally as difficult. So I can understand the 11.7 million. Okay, I'm more than willing to kick that over to Tanya and say, this is your baby. You tell us what you think would be the best use of that 11.7. But anything less than 34 million, we're going to have to borrow from someplace, and that means we got debt payments, and we don't have the money to pay debt payments. Kind of like we're buying a car, but we can't afford the payments. So I'm sorry, Tanya, I jumped in front of you.
No,
us what you
I
think.
want to kind of leave it up to board discussion because this is frankly your board's time to deliberate and kind of give staff direction. Maybe piecing together what staff heard when we provided the facilities options. Number one, the board had asked for what are options that we could fund our 48 million of critical facilities. This is a non-discuss. We must move forward with those repairs. There is no good option that we presented to the board. There's high risk in some of the options because we are counting on revenues that we don't know they may not even exist in the future. During that conversation, I believe it was Commissioner Rogers that asked for additional clarification around what is ARPA eligible, to understand more what could we fund with ARPA in relation to what I understood is the board's recognition of any debt means we will have to face additional cuts in the general fund in the coming years, which will impact services. Our general fund is not at a point that I can kind of skim off what's called in budget sometimes the fat, so that it's not, there will be further reductions. So really the policy question in front of the board is, how do you want to use ARPA in relationship to this one-time treasury federal government dollars one time in relationship. At the same time, we're looking to, the board will be needing to adopt a balanced budget and understanding this year isn't in a vacuum. We are going to have additional fiscal challenges moving forward. When we talk about facilities, our facilities team is currently undergoing a facilities condition index. I'm confident, just in my conversations with Ms. Brown, our facilities director, is that we are going to have really additional emergency needs that will come forward. We may have some more time to fix them because those buildings are not housing people. At the same time, what's included in these options is knowing that our community is continuing to recover from the pandemic and looking towards resilience. So that is where you do see the community grounded economic resilience project. So there is an opportunity to have that balanced approach here. I will say, as your county administrator and your budget officer, I want to underscore there are no easy decisions going into this budget process this year. And so the interrelationship with these options and our budget is significant, and the decisions that the board makes may have additional kind of service pressures and decisions we may need to make in the future.
So Commissioner Willie, if I could put you on the spot, I think what I've heard from you is that you're willing for a next discussion to include the option of the ARPA eligible up to 34 million for the facilities, for you having the model include the 11.7 million for at least to the CAO, like I was getting at, whether it's general government facilities, or have her look at the dual problems that we acknowledge we have. Commissioner Treese, I don't know, and to be clear, what I'm also saying is, I think I'm hearing multiples comfortable with going the next step with these numbers. Mindful that the 7.1 could be utilized.
I'm comfortable with that. And I'd just also like to remind us all that the work that we do on the jail, that's not just for the county and unincorporated county. That's everybody, that's municipalities. We all depend on that. So I'm just saying that it's bigger than a building that we house our employees in.
Yep. Yeah, it's just not a.
And just for clarification, let's keep in mind that the 7 million
Yep.
of the reallocation is not included in those numbers
Correct.
across the white. So
Correct.
we still have 7 million to
In blue.
play with, if
Yep.
you want to call it that.
I'm
Or
comfortable
allocate.
to answer your question.
Yeah. I know this conversation has helped me a lot. And I appreciate the work that's gone into all the estimates and the number crunching. The part that I think we and our staff are acutely aware of are those full countywide government needs, as opposed to being necessarily community informed through our co-creation, collaboration, and partnerships. And that's where I think all of us are grateful, though we might use different words, for having the opportunity for continued conversations, hearing what the crew and the small business work groups have, other engagement, but with that power, that opportunity of that 7 million as well to put into action. I mean, I go back to, what was it, the CARES Act days where we had folks coming to us saying, well, we have a nonprofit and we want you to give us money to build a new building or increase our programs. And we've gotten a lot more guidance from US Treasury about how those dollars can actually be used in community. And we're trying to stay true to that. And it's not always fun.
I have one final question, it has to do with the obligated amounts, and I understand under the treasury what they're doing. What happens if monies are not spent? I mean, we're talking about, this is what we have unobligated or unassigned, that's a 7 million. Do you have a policy in regard to things that maybe don't come in at the obligation level that you said?
That's part of the reason why we want to move to that 6-month rotation, is so that we can take a look every 6 months and say, are you spending as expected? So that we don't leave anything on the table.
With that, again, I don't want to keep badgering on that, but it for the unobligated, I should say, for the obligated that's not spent, are you seeking guidance so that you don't have to keep coming back and reallocating, or will there be some direction? How are you going to deal with that?
I think every local government ARPA recipient is going through those same questions. I can tell you, at least from serving on national cohorts with governments from across the country, we're all battling the same thing. There is a lot of pressure on the Treasury to consider extending their timelines, but we're going to assume that that's not going to happen. We're going to do our best to make any reallocations that need to happen before the end of 24. Under the assumption that anything we don't spend by the end of 2026, the Treasury could take back. That's the assumption that we're
So
working.
we're not the only ones, or I'm not the only one sweating bullets.
Oh, trust me, every ARPA manager from across the country.
I'm just not hearing it from any of our peers here in Oregon. Am I just being,
But Dorian's world is different than the world you're looking at. I think that's why.
So I think what we can do is we can further define what that 6-month process is to give the board some assurance on kind of what does that review look like to ensure that once we get to the end of ARPA, that there aren't dollars on the table. I think that helps those our community-based organization that we're contracting with, and it also helps the board. So we can clarify it. And at a staff level, Chair, I think I'll say maybe that's staff are concerned about this, but we are actively working through it, with our partners and learning from other organizations. And I think that's why electeds hire staff to deal with those kind of issues and to make sure that we're not leaving money on the table and we get the dollars out the door.
honestly, I feel very well served by the diligence that you all practice. It's really going to take us a few more months here in 2023. I'm looking at your wonderful ARPA phases timeline because I love timelines. So, before we know it, it's going to be July and we will have somehow survived our budget process, still liking one another. And so we're really only going to have 6 months, 2 6-month cycles where you're able to get these dollars into action, get feedback from our community partners so that by the middle of 2024, we can go, okay, how do we make sure we are successful in fully obligating these dollars by December 31st? Because we always pull a fast one on you in November and December and don't really meet 4 weeks of the month, each of those months. So I know we pull a crunch time on you. So, but based upon your track record today, I know we're going to be very well served.
Well, I think it's also important to recognize the committee that you've been working with as well. So thank you to Chair and to Commissioner Willie for the work that you've put in to get us where we are as well. So
Thank you. I'll take that.
well, it's genuine.
Before we close, if I could summarize to make sure that I have the right guidance for my team. Am I understanding correctly that we do indeed want to move forward with resilience as an overarching theme
Yes.
and continue with the same values you committed to?
Yes.
You are indeed directing staff to consider reallocation options for that approximately 7 million to come back to you in March.
Yes.
Yes. And finally, for the tranche 2 allocation options, I'm hearing an interest in seeing potentially 2 or 3 scenarios that balance the need to invest in facilities and community resilience, potentially with that $7 million.
Yes.
I'm not married to two
We'll,
or
we'll
three,
review.
because you've gotten pretty clear feedback from a number of us. But at least one. So I expect per your next steps that we'll have information in March, and depending upon when it is, you may or may not be all done with your crew feedback. But it sounds like we're gonna have 2 touch points in March. And I think that's probably going to include a pretty thick document that helps me understand that community feedback, so that that I'll understand that we really did ask for feedback, and this is what that gift of feedback is, so that I'm comfortable providing my 1 of 5 direction for that second touch point, and then that those April touch points. Does
Absolutely.
that match up?
Yeah, for the feedback, it won't just be the feedback. We'll make sure that that information includes what was the process to
Oh,
get-
yeah,
get to that feedback
yeah.
as well.
Does that include what was, so there's crew, but there's also that community engagement, joint community engagement with Beaverton and
Yes,
Hillsborough?
that's crew. We all share the crew.
Oh,
So the
And then the
IGA that
thing-
you passed to pool ARPA funding together with cities, it's the same membership as crew. We just have a sleeker name now.
And that's the importance of the process to get. the
Yep.
feedback.
Yes.
it's one. Got it. Phew,
Thank
a
you.
lot there.
Any other questions?
Learned a lot. Thank you. Keep up the good work. I bet it's gonna be easier and clearer come March.